All right. Good evening, folks. Good evening. This is Michael Strode coming to you on what would be normal second Monday, Movement Monday. You may have noticed that this particular Movement Monday, coming in unscheduled as per usual, is coming in with a lot less fanfare. The reason being that I lost the guest for this month. Effectively, we just had some trouble getting the schedule that we had spoken about confirmed and locked in. That is not to worry. That is sort of not necessarily anyone's fault. Just a sort of challenge of time. Then there was a backup guest. That I could not get confirmed, also because of scheduling. Both a bit on my end, a bit on their end. So there was a lot going on in terms of getting this particular segment scheduled for Movement Monday, and I was trying to figure out whether or not I actually wanted to broadcast this evening, whether or not it was going to be meaningful for me to broadcast this evening, and I wanted to make sure that I kept the schedule that normally occurs there. So that's what I'm going to do. I probably won't broadcast as long this evening, namely because I've got a lot going on right now. I'm just going to set this timer for myself so that I know what I'm doing in terms of time here. I've got a lot going on. I've actually got to board a plane tomorrow, and that's going to be happening around 2:15. I'm going to be heading over to Western North Carolina for the New Economy Coalition member planning or member meeting rather. So that should be something that I'm definitely looking forward to participating in. Yeah, it's been an interesting season thus far. But before I begin, I just want to make sure that I do introduce. This is Movement Monday with Michael Strode of the Coconut Collaborative. This series, Movement Monday, which began in September of last year, partially in partnership with Bridge Embassy for Black America, now shuttered. But this series began as an exploration, really, of solidarity economy narratives as they exist in Black communities. Really, a study out of curiosity. Something that I was very curious about personally, and something that I wanted to share in conversation with the public. With folks that follow the Coconut Collaborative page, with folks that have engaged with the Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, with folks that are engaged in the Solidarity Economy Working Group of Chicago DSA. Just a lot of folks that existed in my sphere, in my circle of influence, a circle of a relationship, that I wanted to get out these narratives about the solidarity economy initiatives that exist in Black communities, and to really begin to build a cohesive narrative around what solidarity economy looks like. In terms of what types of projects are we engaged in, how does solidarity economy look different in our community and from our perspective, from our space of existence as communities that have been on the margins, that have always attempted to stand up and build economies that were broad, that did not necessarily leverage only financial capital, but that were very dependent upon social capital, that were very dependent upon the relationships that we had built with each other, and that actually emphasized several different aspects that are not readily apparent in the financialized economy, right? Or rather sort of the market economy framework. So, I began this study just, again, out of curiosity, out of wonder. I wonder what's out there, and I wonder if other people know about it. There were some things that I already knew about, and there were some things that I was still learning, that I was still picking up, that I was still gathering and clawing at. But I hope that this has been an opportunity for folks to engage in viewing some of those projects and in hearing some of those voices from those projects, and to really understand all of the different ways that we make the economy that we deserve. And so, yes, as I was trying to determine whether or not I was actually going to broadcast because of those challenges with securing that follow-up guest, it just came to me that there was an opportunity, there was a moment to reflect. So again, this month, New Economy Coalition member gathering. I'm hopping on a plane tomorrow. I'll be out in North Carolina, near Asheville, from Tuesday through Friday, sitting with a group of folks who are attempting to think about and visualize, what an economy should look like, what an economy could look like. What are the elements of an economy that cares for all life, that really, values people and planet? And we're going to be strategizing together. We're going to be envisioning together. We're going to be developing relationships around shared ways of working and shared projects that we might want to work on in the future. And it's something that I'm really looking forward to with this group. This is the group that, organized, of course, Common Bound here in 2018, which I had a great time at. In 2017, they had the member gathering here in Chicago, which was really the first time that I had an opportunity to engage with the New Economy Coalition. And at that time, I attended the Highlander Research Center's Highlander Education and Research Center's economics and governance curriculum. They were premiering that curriculum at that time. And so, this New Economy Coalition gathering just kind of represents a next step in my ongoing research of these new economy initiatives and of this solidarity economy framework, as I work to think about ways to implement that on a local level. Those are things that I'm actively bringing to the organizations that I work with. I've mentioned several times here on the program, working with South Darien Manor Community Association, and just, on a very hyper local level, how does it look to introduce these complex ideas, not in the space of people that we already have a shared understanding with, not in the space of people that are already familiar with these ideas, but how do you actually bring them to communities and to neighborhoods that are not immersed in them every day, that are not hyper political in that sense, right? And so that's some of the work that I'm looking to do on this local level here in Chicago. How do I translate these ideas to these communities, into these spaces? And so, I'm going to go and get immersed in it, for a bit here in North Carolina. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do what I've always done, which is I study and I research, and then I apply, and I study and I research, and then I apply. So I just want to do a brief recap of those four elements that we've been covering, back throughout the earlier parts of the series. So again, this series was strategized initially around four core elements. We were talking about cooperation. What is cooperation? How is cooperation central to the building of human societies? How is it central to building a different type of economy and a different type of economic framework? So we've been dealing with that. We've been dealing with the notion of capital, and what is capital like? What are the different forms of capital that are relevant to what we are, the type of economy that we're building? What are all of the elements of the economy that we are looking to utilize in order to create an economy that has a broader lens, that has more ways for people to engage. So we're not just talking about ways that people have to engage through money, and so they're always trying to figure out how to pursue specifically money, but living capital, natural capital, intellectual capital, experiential capital. All of these things are things that we can trade. All of these things are things that we exchange. All of these are things that we value, because all of these are things that make a community whole and that make an economy whole. So we've been talking about capital extensively throughout some of the conversations we've had. We've then gone into just kind of understanding the expansive economy, right? So this is that donut economics model that Kate Raworth, has been talking about recently. But this is a model of an economy that, again, is whole, that respects the fact that we have ecological limits, that we have limits within the planet that we have to kind of find a way to operate within, but that also respects the fact that we have to set a foundation for what are the things that are critical, that the needs that we immediately need to meet for people, if we're going to make a space, if we're going to make an economy that really respects everyone, that really operates in a way that ensures that everyone is whole, as we are trying to figure out what other what other fulfillment people might need inside of their lives, right? So there's some basic elements there, water, food, shelter, equity and equality, peace and justice, that are fundamental to human beings being able to live a whole life. But then there's some ecological limits again that, we don't want to overshoot and, pollute the air and acidify the oceans and pollute the soil. We want to make sure we're operating within some boundaries. So we've been talking about that notion of what a whole economy looks like, and then finally we've been getting at that notion of autonomy, which is really just talking about the fact that we are trying to construct this new economic framework, and not even a new economic framework, but just, we're trying to extract or excavate some old principles, because ultimately these are about communities that are seeking a certain level of autonomy. When we talk about the food sovereignty movements and land sovereignty movements, what we're talking about are communities that are trying to wrest control back from control that was taken from them, during periods of colonialism and periods of imperialism, periods of enslavement. These are communities that have felt their autonomy wrested from them during those periods, and what they're trying to do when they're building these new economic narratives, when they're building these solidarity economy frameworks. When we talked last month to Nyambi Royster and Katrina Baxter, the work that Soil Generation is doing in Philadelphia is really about their community exerting control over the space, over the ways that they are able to live fully within their community, that they are able to fully embody, everything that they want to see within their community, right? It's about autonomy. And, that sort of symbolic notion of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and that Black Panther that they put on the vote stickers was really about those communities seeking a level of political autonomy, but not simply because they wanted the opportunity to vote, but because they wanted the opportunity to determine the outcome of their lives. They wanted autonomy for that purpose. And so we've been talking about those four aspects, that cooperation, capital, economy, and autonomy. And beyond that, we've had an opportunity to, lift up some voices that have been doing that, throughout the country. So, in our discussions previously, again, we've had Danielle M. Kali and Malaya Connolly from Nexus Community Partners and Village Financial Cooperative. Danielle, has shouted out some welcome news on her Facebook page, just noting that she's gone over formally to do cooperative development directly with Village Financial Cooperative. And what's happening there in the Twin Cities is that communities, after the death of Philando Castile, recognized that they wanted to exert some control over their financial lives. And the best way that they could see to do that was to develop a credit union, a financial cooperative. So, bringing those cooperative principles to how the community is able to manage its collective pot of money. And what are the needs that the community is trying to meet when they put their money together, right? So ultimately, it's not simply about us, saying, let's put our money together only so that we can develop the same sort of leadership structures and hierarchical structures that brought us to the current place that we're at. But it's how do we actually develop a new set of values or a new type of structure by which we are governing the resources that we're drawing together. So, in the Village Financial Cooperative, of course, they're operating by those cooperative principles, which means that members are in control. When you put your money inside of that credit union, you have a vote in the board of directors. You have a vote in the direction of the credit union. You have a say in what type of financial products that institution brings forward. So ultimately, what we're doing here is, again, bringing cooperative values, bringing solidarity economy principles into an infrastructure that the community then has the opportunity to decide how it's best utilized. We went on after that discussion in March to talk to Latiera Pifus from Womanist Working Collective, previously located in Philly, now relocated to Chicago. Hey. And Latiera Pifus and Womanist Working Collective was developing a mutual aid space, so a space where Black women could get together and think about what are the needs that we need to meet that are not being met in the current economic structure and the current economic framework. How can we meet those needs amongst each other? How can we take care of each other? How can we develop an infrastructure that can figure out and assess what the problems are in our communities and in our spaces, and then develop new infrastructure that can address those needs? So, I mean, from out of Womanist Working Collective came their reciprocity time banking initiative, because what they saw was that, we can pursue the opportunity to locate financial resources to meet all of our needs, or we can do a bit of assessment, a bit of that forward work, and determine what are the assets that exist amongst ourselves, what are the assets that we have within ourselves and within our community structures, and how can we meet those needs inside of a time banking infrastructure where we're trading our time with one another. We're figuring out who has what assets, who has what needs, and we're doing social matchmaking between them in that time banking infrastructure. After that discussion with La Tierra, which was thrilling, we went on to speak in April, pardon me, no, I'm mixing my dates. May, in May with Dara Cooper of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. And, again, to the discussion a moment ago, we were talking about this element of land and food sovereignty. And why do communities want land and food sovereignty? Because the people who are determining land policy are determining how those communities are able to exercise their right to feed themselves, right? How we are able to feed ourselves is dependent upon what the policies are around land ownership, land tenure, and land inheritance. And right now we are seeing so many cases that exist in the South where communities are losing access to that land that their families have held over over decades rather. Can't say centuries because, we only about 100 years out, from Jim Crow. But that's another question. And so, when we talk about those issues of land and food sovereignty, what we're talking about is the opportunity for communities to determine, again, what their access is to the foods that they desire to eat, what their opportunities are to build structures and land where they can retreat to. When we get ousted from the cities because of gentrification or because of the extreme cost of land, where do we go? Where are the places that we have to go that we can retreat to? So the discussions around land and food sovereignty are critical questions. The discussions around community land trusts and limited equity cooperatives are critical questions that we need to be in discussion about as we are thinking about how the solidarity economy applies to Black communities. Then we talked in June with Jamila Medley of the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance, who are doing, again, critical work around the development of worker-owned cooperatives, work around, the development of a cooperative ecosystem in Philadelphia. And we had an opportunity to see what it takes to begin to build out that pipeline of resources. And then, what it takes to do the education around how to resource that ecosystem. Because ultimately, it's not simply about us, making sure that people... It's not simply about us making sure that people have the right financial, institutions that they can go to for these things. It's not simply about, us making sure that people have business developers that they can go to develop cooperatives. But we actually have to cultivate a cooperative culture, a cooperative social infrastructure that allows us to build the relationships that we're going to need to govern these businesses, to govern this housing infrastructure, and to govern all of these elements of cooperatives that are formed. So, in Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance is doing a lot of that cooperative culture work. They're doing a lot of that cooperative development work, and they're doing a lot of that cooperative ecosystem work that's very necessary to ensure that when these structures come to be, that people can hold them together, right? That people know how to hold them together. And, one of the things that I want to highlight about that, right? This week we just saw a story come out about Leon Finney and the Woodlawn community, right? And the substance of that story is just that we allowed one definition of leadership to govern an organization and essentially to govern a community. And I mean, I'm going to say we allowed loosely, right? Because, certainly there were lots of elected officials who did their darndest to appoint. I mean, there's a certain level of appointment of black leadership, right? And so, in terms of appointing black leadership, when Leon Finney, rose as an organizer, and when political officials decided that he was the one that they were going to talk to, that presented an opportunity for values to go astray. And so, effectively, that seems to that is what occurred, right? You have one person who's the pipeline, who's the sort of the gatekeeper for resources for an entire community, and when that occurs, corruption is just around the corner, unfortunately, right? And so when we talk about developing these cooperative principles and about people learning these cooperative principles, again, it's not simply a thought exercise, right? It's an exercise in thinking about how we are governing all of our institutions, right? So every single nonprofit that exists in our communities at this point, if they do not have an accountability infrastructure that involves direct governance to the community in which they are working, then you need to kick them out. They need to go. Right? Because ultimately, these cooperative infrastructure, this cooperative culture needs to permeate and penetrate every single institution that's going to be providing any level of service to our community. Because otherwise, the opportunity for corruption is too close. It's too near, right? It's too easy for any institution and any organization to become a gatekeeper inside of a community and then assume that it needs to exist for 30 years. And ultimately, we need to be figuring out how our organizations need to be figuring out an expiration date. What is the date when you are looking for your work to be completed and for your organization to sunset? Now, I recognize that that's a challenge because so many of the problems that we have are multi-tiered, meaning that all of these problems are complex and they're interlinked, and it's challenging for us to address them in a finite period of time. But ultimately, we need to figure out what problem we are attempting to address, when we are going to get to addressing that problem, and when we're going to sunset. Because if we don't figure out some sort of strategies around that sunsetting of organizations and building of new formations, then it's too easy for us to fall into a very comfortable position where we, accept a foundation grant, or we accept, some other sort of monies and resources, and we become an organization that's entrenched and embedded in a community, not necessarily deeply in service of that community, but deeply in service of the administration that makes up that institution. And that's not what we want. We want institutions that actually are going to address problems, and then they're going to leave or dissolve as necessary, right? We talked, after that in July with Dion Lucas of E.G. Wood. And Dion Lucas, Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, recently had a field trip scheduled to visit E.G. Wood. And I'll talk about Co-op for Lib in just a moment. But, unfortunately, that trip had to be canceled due to some challenges with their flooring. What Dion Lucas is doing is, really just thinking about, again, bringing these cooperative principles to the development of commercial infrastructure in urban communities, right? And so, what does that look like? Well, ultimately, business owners are at the behest of these commercial landlords that they are paying rent to, right? And so they're paying rent to these commercial landlords, and there's not necessarily any pathway to the ownership of that commercial real estate. So, what E.G. Wood is doing there, I misspoke a moment ago by saying what Dion Lucas is doing, because this is, again, a cooperative infrastructure, which means there's a whole level of governance there inside of that organization. What E.G. Wood is doing is thinking about the redevelopment of commercial corridors in urban communities that is collectively governed by the stakeholder of businesses. So by the tenants that are actually running businesses out of these buildings become stakeholders in this larger real estate investment firm, right? And then from there they get a share and they get voting rights inside of the entire cooperative infrastructure. So Dion Lucas had an opportunity to kind of talk to us in depth about that initiative and to really share what his vision was, and what the vision of E.G. Wood is for the redevelopment of these communities, for the revitalization of these commercial spaces, because ultimately, again, it's not simply about a single developer coming in and then calling all the shots about what happens in a community, but how are the businesses engaged as stakeholders in determining what commercial infrastructure looks like? How is the community engaged as a stakeholder in what commercial infrastructure looks like? And how can we actually be in conversation with both of these sides to ensure that everyone's voice is represented? And so, that's something that, you should definitely go back and check out. And then, finally, this last month, Katrina Baxter in August with Soil Generation, Katrina Baxter and Niambi Royster of Soil Generation, sharing with us some of the dynamic work, again, around food sovereignty and around food justice and food access that they're doing in Philadelphia, and really around, again, cultivating within us these cooperative principles and this cooperative culture that will allow us to work on projects together in a way that ensures that we actually are able to govern them collectively, govern them together, right? Build these projects, govern them together, and then figure out a way forward inside of that new governance. Effectively at a small level, at a micro level, we are developing new governance infrastructure, and hopefully the ideal is, right? And the ideal that is spoken about by Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimbard in Collective Courage is that people who are in cooperative infrastructures develop a mindset towards leadership and towards possibly even a sort of a political opportunities that move them into a place where they feel empowered enough that they say, you know what, if I don't feel like the alderman is doing it right, I can probably go and take that seat. And so we hopefully we are cultivating a new generation of leadership by instituting these cooperative infrastructure where we are practicing democracy at a micro level, because that's ultimately, what the cooperative infrastructure is about. It's about injecting democracy at smaller and smaller levels in our community, so that it's not just that we're practicing democracy when we go to the voting booth or when we go to the ballot box, but we are actually practicing democracy at every level of our community. And so, when I was invited, here to redevelop the handbook for the South Darien Manor Community Association, the one thing that, that they're going to get from me out of this conversation is how can we make this community association ultra democratic? Like, how can we actually make this community association more representative of all of the voices in this community, so that it's not simply a very small group of people, possibly a small clique, developing this handbook, giving people prescriptive notions around how the community should look, and then going out there and saying, this is the handbook, you need to obey it, or we're going to drum you out of town. Because that's not how you build communities. That's not how you build relationships. So, that's been what we've been talking about so far. This month we were supposed to have on Tara Hines of the Black Permaculture Network, but again, unfortunately, our schedules could not match up to make that recording happen. We then got an opportunity to talk to Tiffany. I'm forgetting Tiffany's last name, but that was supposed to be our substitute guest. But again, our schedules could not match up. But Tiffany will probably make it into the 2020 rotation, because she's done some interesting work with some solidarity initiatives on community resilience and climate resilience in Puerto Rico. She's doing some of that work here on his stateside now. And of course, has done some social media work with Black Permaculture Network, so can possibly share a little bit of the history around the Black Permaculture Network, which effectively is a network that was developed. I don't know all of the folks who were in the founding of it, so if I get somebody's name off or miss someone's name here, forgive me. So we've had Tara Hines, we had Pandora Thomas. I think Katrina Baxter, had noted some involvement with that early formation. But the Black Permaculture Network was effectively a formation that was set up so that you could gather together all of these permaculture practitioners. And again, permaculture is a sort of form of sustainable agriculture. It's a form of agriculture that's meant to be in alignment with the natural cycles. So, making sure that you're not, running water up a hill, but, where is the natural flow of water going? How can we use the sort of natural landscape and terrain of the place where we're growing to actually, cultivate better crops? And so the Black Permaculture Network was a group of Black practitioners of permaculture who were coming together to figure out, again, what is the unique contribution, the unique sort of knowledge that we bring as Black practitioners to this practice of permaculture. And so that's right now it's kind of ongoing as a group in a sense, that shares knowledge with one another. But certainly there's the opportunity for folks to gather together if they choose to. And I'm sure that, lots of the folks that are in the group get together at the annual Bugs conference, and that's an acronym that Black Urban Growers and something or other. I forget the last part of the name, but Black Urban Growers. So they do an annual conference, where folks who are folks, who are Black, who, do agriculture, who do urban gardens and urban agriculture, get together, do skill shares, do space shares, and just kind of trade knowledge that way. So that's the landscape of what we've covered so far. Coming up, again, in October, we've got Richard Wallace from Equity and Transformation, who's going to be sharing some insight with us about the informal economy. Imhotep Adisa of Keperu Institute in Indianapolis. They hosted, probably 3 years ago, a Cooperatives and People of Color Conference, that brought in Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimbar to do some speaking. We had some folks from Chicago visit that conference. And then in December, Yaved Holtz of Cowrie Village and Baobab, the Bay Area organization of Black-owned businesses. So that there's still some dynamic conversation that's up for 2019. Certainly, I'm looking forward to the conversations that I'm going to be scheduling in 2020. If you know someone whom I haven't spoken to who probably should be on this show, you feel free to let me know in the comment section. You feel free to tell me who they are. While this is my stretch of curiosity that I've been embarking upon, it's not really my show alone. Because this is really about people that I'm very curious to talk to, because I'm picking their brains, because ultimately I'm trying to use some of their ideas to figure out how I can make Chicago different, how I can make Chicago better, right? I'm very place-based. I'm very committed to Chicago to the extent that I will be here for a while. But I truly do want to have the opportunity to kind of talk to people, because I'm trying to extract insights that I can bring to people that I work with, that I organize with, and ultimately, we can improve all of our organizing capacity when we have a space to share these ideas and to share these practices. So that's that schedule. I want to note the Cooperation for Liberation. So again, yesterday we were supposed to have a field trip. We were supposed to have a field trip to E.G. Wood. That did not happen. We've had a bit of bad luck, with kind of scheduling field trips. Again, not necessarily anyone's fault. There have been some odd circumstances that have prevented certain field trips from happening. But we are looking forward to rescheduling with E.G. Wood. We are looking forward to scheduling with the Catatumbo. And so yesterday, the Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group had an opportunity to host just a general core team meeting where we talked a bit about what the core team is working on, what the breakout groups that we formed, the committees that we formed is working on, and then really just, again, get in that space where we are in mutual aid and in mutual support of one another, where we're building relationships that extend beyond the organizing that we're doing together, but that really get into the fact that we are human beings and we are fragile. And sometimes we don't need politics. We need somebody to, caress a shoulder, to just, tell us it's going to be okay. We need support, right? And so we had an opportunity to just get close, get intimate, and just really lean in a little bit with one another before we open back up and have a gathering of community. So that gathering of community is coming again on September 22nd. So September 22nd is going to be another edition of our Worker Cooperative Curriculum series. September 22nd, we will be covering using co-ops. And that's going to be a thought exercise a bit in taking a problem that is identified in the community and just kind of drawing out, visualizing that problem, and then seeing how we can develop a cooperative solution that addresses that problem. So we're going to have some breakout groups there. We've got a new culture, arts, and movement committee that's formed yesterday that's going to be helping us to think very intentionally about how we do circle opening activities and then circle closing activities, right? So how you just kind of open the space, how you close the space, and then how we can make sure that we're really deeply utilizing popular education strategies all throughout this curriculum. So ultimately, this is not necessarily about coming to a space to be lectured to. This is about the fact that we recognize, because we are in a solidarity economy, that everybody that comes to the room has a certain amount of experiential knowledge that they bring with them. And so ultimately, we all come to the room as educators, right? And while there may be, designated facilitators who are just helping us to move along the agenda and to help us keep on time, we are ultimately all trying to cultivate a space where the knowledge that's in the room can come out. Right? That's what the facilitators are doing. They're trying to encourage the knowledge that's already in the people that are in that room to draw itself out into the space so that we can all share in it. In the same way that we're doing here on the Ujamaa Hour by having these conversations with people from far away and near. We're ultimately, again, just recognizing that there's so much knowledge, so much insight that's available inside of our communities, and that if we can bring it together and we can view it through the lens of these cooperative principles, then perhaps we can create new formations, new forms of governance, new types of organizations that can shift, what the state of our communities. So that's what's going to be happening September 22nd. That's 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. That's a Sunday at the Breathing Room Space, 1434 West 51st Street. So we encourage you to come out. Of course, if you are not already on the list, you can find us on Facebook, Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, which is extensively linked, within the Cola Collaborative Facebook page. And so, you can look us up there. Once you look us up, you have an opportunity to join the listserv, which is at the bottom of this flyer, the cola.groups.io /G/coop for lib, COOP for LIB. So we encourage you to do that. Check us out. Because ultimately, again, we're attempting to be a space where people can really get deep insight in terms of what's happening in the world of cooperatives, what it means to be inside of a cooperative, what it means to govern a cooperative collectively, and then ultimately go out in the community and figure out the applications of these principles. Because that's what we're doing. This is not necessarily just a thought exercise. This is a work. And the fact that we've broken into committees, shows that we are committed to a bit of that work internally. So we want to govern this formation, even that we are in right now, this practice and this study. We're doing that sort of governance. We're doing that democratic decision making right now inside of Co-op for Lib, even as we're preparing people to do that inside of actual cooperative formations. So that's where we're at on that. I encourage people to go ahead and check that out. Of course, here at the Cola Collaborative, we are continuing to advance the study of time banking here in Chicago. We're working on setting up some additional what we call time salons. So effectively, what time banking is, again, just covering that territory once more, as we always do, is trading time as a currency. So doing deep asset mapping inside of communities, getting communities to unpack what the skills and the gifts are that exist inside of their communities, and then ultimately getting people to share those assets with one another, using time as the only medium of exchange, using time as the only currency. So, if you have an hour and then, I have a skill that you see, I'm particularly good at, facilitation. I have some insights around IT project management. I have some insights around, just personal strategy or just kind of life strategy, right? So if you spend an hour with someone inside of the time bank, receiving a service from them, you take that hour that you have in your account, you pass it on to someone else, through the time bank. And then effectively, what you're doing is, it's a form of payment, right? It's a form of exchange, and it's an exchange that's non-monetary. And then what does that obligate you to do? Because you now have spent an hour, you've given an hour to someone in the time bank, you've paid someone for a service they provided to you. You are now obligated inside of that community to provide some time, some exchange, some assistance to someone else. So ultimately, this time bank is really about cultivating a network of reciprocity amongst people inside of this city of Chicago, and building some of these relationships that, tended to exist in neighborhoods. I mean, even in a formation like the South Dairy Community Association, the old block club models and the old neighborhood associations, which, I've heard, unfortunately, from a local organizer that they've had to change the name of the organization because, young folks don't like block clubs. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I do recognize that, that young folk have a certain type of activism and advocacy that they want to participate in. And so that the block club doesn't always seem like the most radical formation in which to do that. I think there is an opportunity to radicalize block clubs and neighborhood associations. I am actively participating in a strategy to do that. But that's forthcoming. But ultimately, time banking, again, is really about building those neighborhood relationships that ultimately can not only help you it's not simply about just the one-to-one relationships that happen, but if we can actually unpack what the assets are inside of our communities, then that provides the opportunity for us to think about projects that are further and deeper beyond even what we are currently doing in our communities. And I'll relate it to this. There's something that I see when I go into the breathing room. The breathing room is developing their Freetown 2020 initiative. And as soon as I have further information about that, I'll be sure to share it. But at the breathing room, they've right now got posters on the wall, and they've got different types of skills that they're looking for inside of their Freetown 2020 programming, right? So they're going to be launching some programming in 2020. And they want to have some different skills that are mapped out and people who can provide those skills so that they can build that into their programming. Now, that's one way to kind of build up a skill exchange or a skill share. But let's think about if we're doing that for every single project, is there some efficiency that's lost, right? Is there an opportunity for us to think about how different skills map to other projects? If we had a centralized database, if we had a way that people were actually plugged in and already had those skills mapped, it might go a slightly bit faster, if we were trying to build out a project and we could easily locate everybody inside of our neighborhood and inside of our community that had the specific skills that we needed for each project. But then the other side of that is the needs database. Ultimately, we have a situation inside of our communities where, a lot of the needs databases are held in sort of very enclosed nonprofits. Now, there's probably HIPAA reasons for that. There's privacy concerns around that and around how information is shared. But ultimately, if we could readily identify what needs were most prevalent in our community by simply having a needs database where people were specifically asking for certain things. Maybe they're asking for companionship. Maybe they're asking for rides to the store. Maybe they're asking, for someone to weed the yard or someone to assist with a gardening project. If we knew what those needs were, then what is the possibility for us to actually figure out maybe we need a new organization that can specifically handle this type of need, or maybe we just need to train more people in the community that can address these types of needs. One of the ones that I've heard recently, I've been talking to to a friend Alvin from Windsor Park Lutheran Church, about another project that we're working on in terms of community broadband. And one of the things that he'd mentioned to me is that he's actually getting some training right now for a specific methodology of post-traumatic stress, treatment, or just kind of, PTSD, therapy, just a layperson's version, right? So he's getting a sort of layperson's understanding and version of trauma therapy that can be used amongst community members, so that when they encounter someone with PTSD, perhaps they can figure out a referral pathway. Perhaps they can help those people connect with resources. Perhaps they know certain de-escalation techniques. So ultimately, this is a strategy that a community could potentially use to more broadly address trauma, right? And so that's sort of one thing that's happening with one church, member in South Shore, but it could potentially happen in other communities if we actually knew how to build out a cadre of people who had that skill set, and we actually had a way to appoint people in specific communities that can provide that type of service, right? And so, time banking is my small contribution to developing a more caring economy and a deeper solidarity economy inside of Chicago. It's something that I'm deeply committed to. It's a practice that I picked up, by watching an organization in St. Louis do the same thing amongst its social structures and social spaces. And so it's something that I'm committed to making sure that people use as an asset-based development strategy in Chicago. And I look forward to, opportunities to connect with other communities and to offer that facilitation and offer that insight and offer that the infrastructure. I mean, it's an entire digital infrastructure that we've built up, that will allow time banking to be facilitated in communities, and any community can drop on to the existing infrastructure and figure out the best ways to use it for their organization. So I actually only intended to go about 15 minutes this evening, but perhaps I just got excited, because of that schedule. And every time I think about the people that are on that schedule, I get excited, right? And it's something that I've become deeply passionate about. I was perhaps already passionate about it, but perhaps I just sometimes it takes a nudge. It takes someone to tell you to go further within it. For you to figure out how deep your passion goes, how deep the well is. And that's where I'm at right now. So after this week, I was very exhausted coming into this week because, I was prepping for a long trip. I see Linda Gordon there posting about the Trauma-Informed Chicago, Connecting for a Resilient Future. I can't get to that link right now, Linda, but I will definitely be sure to check it out. That's probably not the one that Alvin was talking about, but I'm sure that that's another opportunity for folks to get some trauma-informed, layperson skill sets that they can use inside of their communities. So, I look forward to and appreciate you posting that. Yeah, so I've got this travel obligation for this week, going again to Western North Carolina, to Asheville. I'm going to be, spending some time with some folks who are, again, thinking about the economy in a very broad way. When I come back, there's, I've got a week break, right? Or not necessarily a break, but at least a week from any travel obligations. And then there's another opportunity to visit some organizations in Detroit. So Symbiosis is having its Congress of Municipal Movements, which is a group of essentially lots of organizations coming together to think about what are the ways that we are developing city-based strategies for how we can more deeply democratize our cities, right? So what are the sort of participatory budgeting strategies that we can make sure that we are implementing on a local level? What are the neighborhood assembly strategies that we can make sure that we're implementing on a local level? How can we hold political officials more deeply accountable? And ultimately, when we talk about sort of dual power, how can we make sure that there is equal power on each side of the equation? So effectively, if you're putting a political official in office, How do you actually have an accountable infrastructure that's on the other side of that political official, that is ensuring that, if you don't do what we need you to do, we can move you on. We can move you on, we can move you out. But it's not simply about the politics of it, right? Because if you don't necessarily have a dual power infrastructure, then again, you have a situation where, Leon Finney can buy all those properties in Woodlawn and then be totally unaccountable to anybody about what he's doing with those properties. And so ultimately, every one of every infrastructure in our community, from the political officials to the nonprofits, to the sort of social sector, every one of those entities needs to have a greater level of accountability to the community, and we need to actually be developing municipal movements that can hold those spaces accountable and that can govern the city in a way that really deeply empowers and deeply engages the local citizenship, right? And so I'll be maybe joining Symbiosis for the Congress of Municipal Movements. I don't know. It's hard to kind of figure out if I can travel that week. But then further down the road in October, I've been invited to the Sawyer Seminar at UIC, and I had an opportunity to look at the guest list, and it is stellar. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'll be sitting with a group that's thinking through these solidarity economies, and just sharing some of the insights of the work that I've done, and then hopefully drawing some insights from the work that those folks have done. So it's an exciting month. It's an exciting 2 months. That's October, and September ain't done yet. And I really look forward to, being with you all through it all, right? So next month we'll be back with Richard Wallace on the Ujamaa Hour, talking about equity and transformation and talking about those informal economies. Hopefully, as soon as I hop off of here, I can go ahead and just confirm with him, make sure that that's actually coming up. And yeah, I want to see you all at Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group. I want to see you all somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I'm out there. I got lots of meetings. I got lots of events, and if I'm not out at an event, that having a meeting and talking about a solidarity economy, you'll probably see me out there dancing. But if you see me out there dancing, ask me about the solidarity economy. I'll stop and I'll talk to you about it. And then I'll get back to dancing. So, I appreciate, you all having the opportunity to share this space with me. Again, I didn't intend to go this long. I thought I was going to be on here 15 minutes and then off. But again, I get excited when I talk about this. I want to make sure that, I open up the floor. Are there any questions? By the by, you don't have to ask. But if you did have a question and I didn't answer it, yes, you can certainly ask it. Word. So I think I did all my announcements. Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, September 22nd. Be there. Be back here on, I had the misfortune of not having my calendar up. But the second Monday, which is, boom, schedule. Second Monday, October 14th, with Richard Wallace. And until then, folks, it's been real. Yeah, I look forward to bumping into you in the streets. And until then, I bid you peace. I bid you good night. Stay in cooperation. Stay in community. We are building something real. We are always building something real. In fact, before I go, I'll do this activity we did at Cooperation for Liberation just because, it's something that's become very resonant with me, which is just pause. Close your eyes for a moment and breathe. Think about the world that you want. Think about an economy that serves the broadest array of community. Think about an economy that respects people. Think about an economy that cares for people. Think about an economy that respects the sanctity and sacredness of the land. Think about an economy that is culturally competent. Think about an economy that ensures that people have what they need. Now ask yourself this question. Who do I need to become so that that economy can come to pass? And ask yourself this question. What skills do I need to learn so that that economy can come to pass? That's all, folks. Thank you. Good night. Peace.